Hello and welcome to What the Lux with me, Fred Moore.
And me, Anant Sharma.
Together we lead Matter Reform, a design consultancy specialising in brand, digital experience and content. And this is a podcast that calls time on tired ideas of luxury.
Alongside industry luminaries and thought leaders, we explore what truly defines category-leading products and services. David, thank you very much for doing this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. This is the first one we've done in New York.
I won't scare you away for future ones.
No, I don't think you will, just judging by the conversation we've had in prelude to starting filming. David, you've had a pretty amazing career from the Robb Report, a go-to publication for luxury lifestyle, travel, automotive, the whole lot, basically the ecosystem of luxury, into now sitting as a board member alongside Frederick Kumenau. Is that right?
Yes.
Tiffany?
Correct.
Just talk us through your journey, would you?
So, specifically with Lugano, when I moved on from the Robb Report after the third or fourth change in ownership over a really short period of time, I decided to do some consulting, which is the two choices that people have when they get out of their kind of day-to-day jobs is they either become real estate agents, which I had no interest in being, or they get into consulting. And so the notion was that I could help smaller brands that weren't part of one of the multinational conglomerates with their positioning, with their marketing, with their strategy, with their build of community, which is increasingly important, not just in luxury, but overall, and give them opportunities to not necessarily compete at the same level as an LVMH, but to be able to do interesting things for their customers that would retain their loyalty and potentially increase their sales. And so far, it's worked reasonably well.
What kind of size, out of interest, what's the sweet spot where you can help transform or help put in place, I guess, the operational rigor?
So I'm not sure that's the most relevant thing. I think it's more about the mindset and the interest and the desire to engage as opposed to continuing to do things the same way. We've seen over the years a number of situations where the economy has shifted, mindset shifted, and a lot of companies have been left flat-footed and many can then disappeared or got swallowed up by the larger brand. So they've got to have resources. They've got to have staff. They've got to be willing to invest in marketing, whatever iteration of marketing dollars that may be. So I would suggest it's probably companies that are doing north of 100 million. But if somebody came along and 75 million that had opportunity, then I would certainly seriously consider it. And the key for me is that it's working with people whose company I enjoy.
Just talk to us about your career. Where did it all start? What drew you to the world of luxury? Was it accidental? Was it intentional?
It was accidental. So I started in my media journey in London working for the Daily Mail.
Right.
So I did that for a number of years. I then met my...
The anti-luxury.
Not then. That was pre-mail.com. I mean, this is back in, they still had gas lamps on the streets. So it was quite some time ago. I then, on a business trip, came over to New York and was introduced to someone who I ultimately married. I was introduced to my wife on a blind date. We got married and I moved here. So I worked at Newsweek International because that was really germane to my skill set, having worked in Europe and understanding the media landscape in Europe. There was a good opportunity for me to work there. I did that for a few years. Didn't love working in the media business in the US. It was very different than working in the UK. Took a sabbatical for a couple of years, got involved in the jewelry business. There's a theme here, which did not end well for me financially, and decided, you know what, advertising, sales, and marketing is what I know. And so I went to the Hearst Corporation and started working on a publication called Town & Country, which is also the epitome of luxury. It's more old money than new money, and the issue for them was to try to change the perception of that brand. Interestingly, it's the second oldest publication in America. It started in 1846, so it's been around quite a while.
Okay, it is basically the biography of American luxury.
It is. And it was really a mirror for the rise and fall of the social classes over the years. So back in the day, it followed the Astors and the Vanderbilts and so on and so forth, the JP Morgans, and then it kind of moved forward as the market changed. In the 60s and 70s, they were the doyen of Palm Beach. Slim Aarons was their photographer, who's renowned.
Iconic.
Took some amazing photographs, most of which were published in the pages of Town & Country. It had a fall from grace. When I started, my timing was impeccable. They had kind of hit bottom, and I was part of the team that was able to help it resurrect the brand and to move forward and to grow. Did that for about 6 years. Then I got moved over to another Hearst publication called House Beautiful, which is interiors, obviously design, decor, very different from Town & Country, but interesting. Did that for 5 or 6 years, and then the Robb Report came calling. And to me, that was something that was an interesting opportunity, independently owned, had limited resources, had a lot of promise, but had a lot of interesting history. Started out life in the 70s as a newsletter for Rolls-Royce owners. When there was no social media, there were no emails. And so that was a way that people could communicate with each other through the pages of the Robb Report. Got sold a couple of times, and then the owner that I worked for was part of a group of publications that he acquired in the luxury space, but Robb Report really was the crown jewel. So that's how I kind of moved. Started at Town & Country, which was luxury, House Beautiful, which was kind of a lateral move, and then arguably Robb Report, which is a step or two up. The challenge that I have had over the years with luxury, when I was growing up in London, which was back in the 60s and early 70s, if you wanted to go into Asbury, had a phenomenal store on the corner of Old Bond Street and New Bond Street. They had a revolving door. It was manned. It was very intimidating to walk into that store. If you didn't have money or felt that you had money, you wouldn't go and peruse the store. That wasn't how luxury was sold. If you wanted to consume luxury, you had to go into one of a handful of locations. The luxury market was small. It was very focused. Not everybody could afford it, nor should they. And people worked towards acquiring items of luxury, whether it was a Patek Philippe or a Rolex or a Birkin bag or whatever, Chanel bag. Then it kind of exploded, and luxury became this enormous business where everybody, it seemed, just put the word luxury on their brand and said, we are a luxury brand. Had no pedigree, had no heritage, weren't creating things by hand, didn't really have the quality and the craftsmanship, but was very good at marketing and had the dollars to market. And that's where I think the luxury market lost its core and its soul, and I don't really think it's recovered from that point.
You asked me at the beginning of this podcast before we started recording why this podcast is called What the Lux. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that I just dislike the word luxury, and it's a little bit of an elbow to dusty or conventional notions of luxury, because I think that it's almost become like a search term.
Yes.
It's a way of just figuring out if something is well made or has design at its heart. What I really love, and what I believe most of the organizations we work with or who feature on this podcast love, is craftsmanship and also the soul of a thing. And the soul of a thing is kind of born when you value the aggregate of effort that's gone into making it. And it does pose, I think, a very interesting question in the world we live in today, which is when you can manufacture an ideal and market it, when you can replicate the aesthetics of a thing, and when you can synthesize a story to try and make something appealing for others, what is it that we're buying?
It's two things there. There's more, but let me just focus on two. So I, along with multiple other people, have been trying to find an alternative word to luxury for the last 30 years. We've not come up with one. There's all kinds of terms that people use, but luxury is the descriptor in the word that everybody understands. And so when you start to talk about other things, people kind of miss the point.
Well, we use timelessness, and we define timelessness as three things: strong founding spirit, long-term thinking, and design as a point of competitive advantage. And they seem wildly obvious, but often they're lost. And I think often companies will kind of rely on history and heritage rather than revisiting the soul of how they were founded.
Yes.
Like you mentioned Astor earlier. There's so many stories about his personality which should be revisited when thinking about the future of brands he's linked to. He gold-plated the plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
He cared so deeply about all
this. The Trump of his day.
Yeah, quite exactly that.
And the brands have really, in some cases, I think, made grave errors in concocting a narrative that is not authentic. And as you look at younger people, so 35 to 40, people that have money, that are willing to consume luxury goods, they understand whether something is authentic or not. Plus, the research that you can do now is unlimited. And so perhaps 20 years ago, you could get away with a storyline that was completely concocted. Now it's much harder to do that. Very difficult to do that.
You think it's harder now to concoct the narrative?
I think the challenge is coming up with a narrative that is authentic to the brand is the way it should go. And I think that companies have gone in a different direction, and they focus more on creating a narrative regardless of its link to the brand, whether it really talks about the specificity of the uniqueness, the bespoke, or all of the factors that make arguably a luxury brand, right? That differentiates it from all the other stuff. Within that, though, the confusion is a lot of the things that are marketed as luxury under all of the major brands are made for a relatively small amount of money in factories throughout the world. These are not products that artisans are working on the outskirts of Florence, beavering away to make, whatever it might be, shoes or pocketbooks or clothes. There are many brands that still make by hand, but when you have a brand with the scale of a Vuitton, you can't possibly make everything by hand. There aren't enough craftsmen in the world.
But I do wonder what the balance between a good headline and a genuine way of feeding. I mean, there are not enough apprenticeships, or they're not enough craft focused entry points, into careers that exist.
There's a foundation that started here that has a number of luxury brand CEOs and presidents on the board. They work with FIT, and they've created this apprenticeship program for kids that want to get into luxury. So they go across all of the disciplines of manufacturing, design, and so on and so forth. LFE is the organization, but it's a small program. It's a class, it's a class a year, which isn't going to help. Interestingly, with Vuitton, I think it was about 20 years ago in the UK, the Advertising Standards Authority, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that enforces that any advertising has to be legal, decent, honest, and truthful, banned Vuitton from running a particular ad that they were running that claimed that their products were made by hand, because such a small percentage of their products are made by hand. Listen, they make wonderful products. It's a phenomenal brand.
Yeah.
I'm not here to knock Vuitton, but the misperception is everything is made by hand by an artisan sitting somewhere in the world, which is not the case.
What do you think the other misconceptions of luxury are that you would like to kill?
That'll make you more appealing as an individual. Owning the brand is going to change your life, improve your life in some way, shape, or form. Cheers. I mean, the whole logo thing is like it explodes and then it quiets down a bit and then it explodes again. And I'm not a big logo person. I prefer quiet luxury. Like a Brunello is a quiet luxury, right? And they've done phenomenally well. Their prices are, $12,000 for a jacket.
Yeah.
This is the entry price. I mean, I'm guessing that's roughly where I think they are.
Yeah, but I mean, the absence of a logo is almost louder than it is,
Yes.
It's a qualifier into a sort of form of membership, of wealth membership.
Yes. Well, there's that Laura Piano hat, the baseball cap that has no logo on it that everyone was drooling over for a while.
Baseball caps. I mean, it's not a version of luxury that I've particularly ever been drawn to.
The logo one?
Well, I've always found it a little bit crass, like things that are over-logoed, and I think a lot of the luxury brands, the mistakes that have been made have resulted from globalization followed quickly by digitization, which is then exposed or left them naked in a way that has created this almost like slight duality of like what they stand for, that I think has really killed off a lot of brand equity, actually, the large behemoths. I
don't think you're wrong in that. I mean, there are two factors that I think are important. One is I believe this is a correct number. You can check me on this. I believe that 80% of the growth in luxury brands over the last 5 years has come from price increases, not from organic growth, not from bringing in new customers. It's price increases, which ultimately I think has reached a ceiling. People now are really saying, is this worth it? Is a pocketbook worth, an entry-level pocketbook worth $3,000, $4,000, or $5,000, right? Where they've almost doubled in the last 5 years. And younger people are much more astute and will look into things much more seriously. So they're concerned about sustainability. They're absolutely concerned about quality. There are things that generation is concerned about that the baby boomer generation wasn't concerned about, certainly to the same extent. People that have been buying a luxury brand or brands for a number of years aren't, I don't think, necessarily going to start digging into, are they authentic? Are they sustainable? Are they this? Are they that? I just don't think that's happening.
Yeah. I mean, look, let's be honest, quality has gone down. The few hand-me-downs I was given that actually fit me still survive in my closet. And most of the luxury products I've bought over the last, from the Mr. Porters of this world or similar, have actually caused me deep levels of anger by just being so badly made they don't survive more than a year or two, in some cases. And I think people are sort of maybe perhaps a little enraged by like how normalized it's become to spend hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars on a T-shirt or a shirt that, actually isn't very well made.
I don't understand people spending thousands of dollars on a T-shirt to begin with.
Yeah.
I really don't. I think that there are certain products that are absolutely worth buying in the luxury space. I think a great suit, made to measure, bespoke, tailored suit rather than off the rack, is significantly better. If you can buy Berluti shoes, they're the best shoes you can possibly buy. But there's a price that comes with that. But Berluti, just staying on that brand for 1 second. So Berluti was, a shoemaker. They've always been shoemakers since, I don't know, the 1700s. They got acquired by Louis Vuitton, who tried to turn them into a luxury brand that had a whole range of products. Suits, shirts, ties, everything. And it didn't go as well as I think they had expected it to go. They did get a bit of a bump at the last Olympics in France because they were kind of the official clothier of all the athletes there. They were the title sponsor. But to my mind, and I think many people of my generation, Berluti makes amazing shoes. The same way that Church's does, or the brand that's owned by Hermès that I'm blanking out on, John Lobb.
What do you think it's like being one of many brands within a holding, not a holding company?
I think it's like being one of 15 children. I think they're trying to get attention. They move people around. It's true at Richemont. It's certainly true at LVMH. People move around. They move from one brand to another. They're running a champagne house, and then they move them to run a ready-to-wear brand, and then they move them to run something else. So they do move people around. Now, whether that's part of the strategy to create executive management of the future, I suspect that's part of it. But I also think that the people that run the brands need to own the brands. They need to understand everything about the brand. They need to be involved in not the most minute decisions, but they need to have a macro approach to how the brand is going to market, whether it's through retail, whether it's through community events, whether it's through manufacturing, whether it's through products. I think they need to be involved in that.
Are there any brands out there and you're just, these people are doing it right?
Chanel and Hermès and Brunello.
Yeah.
Brunello so far haven't put a foot wrong. I'm sure they will at some point, but
we talk about Chanel quickly, actually.
Sure.
Quite interesting because, and I went quite deep on this actually because I did a talk recently to their some of their teams. Obviously, they've just been consistent and have not been buffeted by trends. And they are one of the few brands who haven't undermined their craft, their spirit, I think, in my opinion, and hence their, what their brand stands for. But there have been a lot of changes recently. And how do you think those changes have served the business of the brand?
I don't see any significant change in dynamics. One of the benefits they have, and they have many, is the Wertheim family has owned that brand pretty much since the beginning. And they control the brand. They have a number of other interests and other investments in the luxury. They're very involved in the wine business, for example. They've invested seed money into a number of the independent luxury watch brands. They had a vision and they execute it flawlessly. So they're keeping an eye on the store. And I don't think that anything that they've done, certainly in the last 3-4 years, as there have been some changes, have had any negative impact on the brand. I think the challenge for Chanel is, like it is for many brands, is their pricing is getting a little out of the stratosphere of what I think people are willing to pay. But the other thing that I think is germane is a lot of people that are luxury good consumers will tell you that they would rather buy one Chanel bag than buy 5 other brands that are near luxury or more mass, because they believe that it's quality, they believe it will last, that they're buying into the heritage, and that it could potentially something they could hand down to their kids, if the kids have any interest in those products.
Yeah.
And that's been true for a number of years, right? People will say, look, I'd rather buy quality than quantity. It's all about quality. And I've worked hard for my money, or my significant other has worked hard for our money, or whatever it might be, and I want to spend it judiciously. I want to spend it on the right things that are going to last. I don't just want to throw the money away.
Which I think is something people omit from the sustainability conversation, which is fast fashion is a terrible world, in my opinion. What are the sort of differences that you see in American luxury? Let's call it European luxury for the moment, Brexit aside, and sort of like luxury in Asia and Chinese luxury. And do you think they're coming closer together, or what are the sort of points of difference?
I think Europe and the US are not in lockstep, but are fairly close in terms of the products. The way people live their lives in Europe is intrinsically different from how people live their lives here, certainly in terms of urban areas. Living in Paris as opposed to living in New York is an entirely different experience. London is an entirely different experience. Paris and London are more similar. The US, I think, is quite different. The existence of the EU hasn't taken away the identity of the individual countries. It's taken away their currency, but it hopefully will never take away their identity. So Italians will always be Italians. The French will always be French. The Spaniards will always be the Spaniards. And so there's a clear distinction between those significant European countries. The US is quite different, partially because I think everything is so new here relative to Europe. There's this joke about people saying, my house is 100 years old. I think people in Europe say, I've got shoes that are 100 years old. It's an entirely different structure, right? The history in Europe goes back centuries. The history in this country goes back a couple of 100 years. But you don't have 1,000 years of history here.
When did you move to here?
1986.
So you've been here a long time.
I have.
Ever thought about going back?
I have. Can't go back.
Why not?
Recently, I've considered it because of the things that are going on in this country. My wife's like, we're not doing that. There are things that are really wonderful about England and really wonderful about London, but it's disorganized, it's inefficient, it's incredibly expensive, and the things that you get used to living in a society like New York, you cannot recreate those in London. You just can't. The convenience of things. Now, things have improved significantly, largely because of social media and the internet, digital, and so on and so forth. So you can order things which didn't used to be the case that you could. If you wanted something, you had to go and get it. Here, you've always been able to get something brought to you, whether that was groceries or whether it was alcohol or whether it was clothes or whether it might be in some form or another. And that's only accelerated.
I almost find in the UK, it's like things just sort of seem to almost be purposely designed in a way that sort of is just slightly inefficient. I really notice it when I'm, when you're in America. I think anyone would notice, but everything is so convenient. Everything is designed around convenience.
The problem with that is that your expectations are such that you can become impatient when you go into a point of consumption and they're not efficient. When you go into a store and there's no one to help you, you go into a store and they're slow helping you. It's not a perfect situation by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's much more efficient than it is in the UK.
What are your thoughts on this sort of balancing of innovation and sort of heritage?
I think heritage is really, really important. I think everything's grounded in that because by its very definition, it's where we all kind of came from, where products came from, and so on and so forth. I think you can innovate without tearing up everything and starting again. Things evolve, things can evolve, and I think you need to manage the evolution as well as you possibly can so that you don't lose all of the things that you spent, years, decades, centuries, or whatever it might be, kind of building up. My biggest regret, it's a bit of a tangent, is that the globalization of the world and the economy has pushed out a lot of the small, independent niche brands. They don't exist anymore, or they've been relegated, to side streets. You used to be able to go to Florence, for example. 20 years ago, you could walk through the streets of Florence and you could find, a shoemaker, a silversmith, these craftsmen that were working in the center of Florence, creating wonderful, forget the Ponte Vecchio, but kind of in the outlying areas. Those people are really hard to find. They're there, but they're difficult to find. So now it's replaced by Vuitton and Gucci, Cartier and Tiffany and all the global brands have taken over all of that real estate.
Do you think there are like strategic decisions that could be made around zoning that would help?
So there's a couple of examples. In Orange County, there is a mall, for want of a better word, called South Coast Plaza, which is almost exclusively indoors. And they've got every brand. Every brand exists there. The owners, and it's been in the family since it started maybe 80 years ago, 70 years ago, have merchandised the mall extraordinarily well. So if you want luxury, there's a luxury wing. All of the luxury brands are together. They're not interspersed as they are in often malls. Mall is perhaps not the best word to describe South Coast Plaza. But often when you go into a mall, you've got luxury, near luxury, Woolworths. I mean, it's all kind of mixed together without any thought. That's not the case in a lot of the malls here. Fashion Island in Newport Beach is another example where they've really merchandised it extremely well. And that's largely outdoor. There's a mall out in Manhasset, Long Island, called the Americana, which is almost all luxury, merchandised extraordinarily well. When that situation occurs, I think the brands collectively all do much better. than being interspersed with, a bunch of brands.
What do you think about the sort of business of luxury and the sort of, the involvement of private equity and M&A and, the influence that, money going into the business of luxury has on the craft and the output of the product?
So I've had a couple of personal experiences. One was not good, and one has been very good. My fear for the outside investment in these businesses is the expectation that they're going to create exponential growth. And so how does that happen? It can happen by increasing production. It can happen by expanding distribution. There are a number of ways it can happen. As I mentioned earlier, what's been happening is that the growth has come from price increases, 80% from price increases, which is not healthy because you can't just keep, right? Trees don't grow to heaven. You can't keep putting up your prices. At some point, people are going to say enough. So I think that if the private equity guys and girls come in with a vision for a brand and how to develop it and grow into new markets, to have kind of new extensions of the brand, I think that could work out extraordinarily well. Sometimes that happens, sometimes that doesn't. Often the timeline and horizon for private equity is 3 years. They want to come in, they want to pump it up, they'll cut costs, they'll do whatever they can to increase the bottom line, and then they'll flip it. I understand why they do that. I'm not a supporter of that because I think that these brands need stewards to make sure that they are sustained, that they maintain their position in the marketplace, that they have the opportunity to grow somewhat organically. Investment's always a good thing, don't get me wrong, but it comes at a price. And so that's where I'm fearful.
How do you think we're missing the mark today in the industry as a whole?
I think they're missing out on cultivating younger, up-and-coming consumers. I think that they think about it. I think that they talk about it. I'm not sure that there's a concerted effort to really develop a younger consumer who's starting on their own path financially, who's starting to do better, has the potential to become a customer, tomorrow or the week after. Patek, again, have always had this philosophy that they know all the watch collectors. They know every one of them. Now, Patek doesn't wholesale. Every Patek that you buy through one of their retailers. They supply one of their retailers. Sorry, they don't sell to the public. They only wholesale, right? So it's as with Rolex. So they don't have their own stores. They're branded stores that are owned by partners, whether it's Watches of Switzerland or Bucherer. They're owned in concert. They are concerned about bringing in new customers to the brand because they know that eventually the watch collectors they're going to tap out or they're going to die. Because the average age of a Patek collector is not young by any stretch of the imagination. So they're concerned, and I think some brands do it well. Some brands really have failed to ignite any interest among a younger, somewhat aspirational customer.
I mean, do you think these large luxury behemoths will do well in the next 20 years?
Well, they will continue to put up their prices. They will continue to expand. And so their sales will grow. Will their margins and their profits grow too?
Do you think these large organizations with big flagship brands will sort of survive in a market that's there's more transparency, there are more brands?
They're dominant. For right now, for example, Arnault, I read yesterday, is extending the retirement age that people can run companies and work at LVMH to 85. He's not going anywhere. Listen, Ralph Lauren, actually, we haven't talked about Ralph. I don't know why that didn't pop into my head. So in terms of obsession, in terms of smarts, in terms of doing everything right, Ralph Lauren. And they have a very diverse business. So they've got, at the lowest end, they've got Polo, purple label at the top end. They've got home. They've got fragrance. They've got all the accessories. And their ready-to-wear is hugely successful. They had some challenges a couple of years ago. The stock price took a dive, but they're back. And Ralph, as far as I know, is still approving every piece of creative and every design.
They're just very solid, aren't they? With a very involved voice, familial voice, basically.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
In terms of an American luxury brand, it's one of the few. When people ask you, well, what are the best luxury brands in America that are manufactured here? I struggle to come up with real luxury brands that are manufactured in this country. Everything's out of France or Italy or Switzerland.
I guess it's because it represents, rather than necessarily just being all about history, it represents like an American way of life and hence feels sort of as current today as it did 20 years ago.
Yeah, I would agree.
Luxury's been sort of quite recession-proof on the whole. Well, firstly, do you think we're likely to enter a recession?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
If things continue in the direction that they are currently on, the whole tariffs issue,
Yes.
the significant downsizing of government, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Again, this is a rabbit hole that we can get completely lost in, but the scale of it's a little scary. I mean, the folks from Champagne, which is largely LVMH, right?
Yeah.
Hennessy.
Yeah.
They own most of the significant and successful champagne brands. 100% tariff on champagne. So a bottle of Dom Perignon at $220, whatever the current price is going to become $440.
I mean, it's just wild, actually, when you think about it, isn't it?
And there's a belief among a large number of people that the tariffs are paid for by the exporter, which I still don't understand how people could even fathom that.
Well, what do you think will happen? Do you think we'll just end up with different pricing everywhere?
If this is not just a negotiating tactic and it's all going to get reversed because one day it's in, the next day it's out, I mean, everyone's got a little bit of kind of whiplash from the back and the forth. I think that some of the exporting companies will absorb part of the tariff and some of the importing companies will pay part of the tariff.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have like huge price volatility.
No, but you're going to end up with a 10, at least a 10, if not a 15% price increase on all of this stuff.
What's the percentage of like luxury that is imported roughly in America?
100%.
All of the luxury is imported.
100%.
What are the homegrown American luxury brands?
Ralph Lauren.
Yeah, you're right.
I can't think of another. There are nominal luxury, super high-end wines out of Sonoma and Napa, like Screaming Eagle and Colgan, that are going for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, and that won't diminish. Is the expectation. That will help them enormously once they start to put the tariffs on the Bordeaux's and the Burgundies and so on and so forth. Right? So that'll kind of level the playing field somewhat.
What would you pick? What wines you'll go to?
So I have a love of both. There's a lot of French wines. I love white Burgundies more than I like Napa Chardonnays.
Yeah.
I think the cabs out of Napa are extraordinary. One of the challenges of buying wines in Napa is wine you buy today, you can't drink for 5 years. And so you can spend the same amount of money or less and buy a great Bordeaux that's ready to open and drink, given a little airing and some decanting. But
I've never had a wine from Napa Valley that I've obviously got very limited exposure.
Maybe not today, but we have to get you to Napa. There are some phenomenal business people in Napa. A lot of very, very successful people have gone into the wine business. The family that started Costco have a great winery. There's a whole ton of people that did really well in a business, made a fortune. And so the joke always is, how do you make a small fortune in Napa as you start with a large fortune?
Do you think there's a likelihood that there will be the desired effect through all of this of encouraging homegrown US luxury?
No.
The
thing that I don't understand, and I'm not an economist, and so maybe I'm just kind of completely missing the point here. From my understanding, so there's reciprocal tariffs, right? There are countries that have tariffs on American goods that are being imported. In many cases, these are, particularly in Canada and Mexico, there's a trade agreement that was negotiated by Trump. And in many cases, it's to protect the local industry. So the dairy industry in Canada, which is relatively small, is protected by the tariffs. There are things in Europe that are protected by the tariffs. And there are things that have had tariffs put on them here. But if you create these massive tariffs on steel and aluminum, we can't produce the necessary amount of aluminum. There aren't the smelters, there aren't the factories, they don't exist. And you can't build them over a weekend or over months. It takes years to develop this. The argument over the price of petrol, of gas, is that it's volatile because it's based on the commodity price of oil, but it's also based on the capacity refinement that we have in this country. And I don't think they've built a new refinery in 60 years. So you can't suddenly produce more petrol, more gas for the cars because you can't process the oil. Similarly, to say that we're going to rebuild the chip industry, computer chip industry here, which was part of the CHIPS Act that Biden got through during his administration, that Trump's trying to unravel and do it differently, which is all well and good. But to create clean rooms and factories and environments where you can create advanced chips is not easy. It's really, really complicated. So in the interim, they're going to slap a tariff on all the chips coming in, theoretically, from Taiwan. So anything you assemble here or make here that requires chips is going to go up in cost. And who's paying for that? Ultimately, the consumer is going to pay for that.
David, we always ask our guests the same 4 questions. And the first one is, what would you change about the luxury industry?
I would change their approach to marketing to the younger consumers.
Okay.
And to the emphasis on quality, sustainability, authenticity, because those are the things, and heritage, because those are the things that matter. That's what differentiates a luxury brand.
What concerns you about the world we're leaving the next generation?
Well, pretty much everything. I mean, in the environment, climate change is something that worries me the most. And then also the way immigration has been heading in the last post 9/11. When we reacted to the events on 9/11, it unsettled a region of the country. And I think the ramifications are still being felt 20 years later, 24 years later.
Just expand on that briefly.
We basically bombed the life out of many countries in the Middle East, overthrew dictators, whether it was in Iraq or we tried in Syria, or whether it was Libya. And as egregious as those individuals were, they maintained a certain equilibrium in the marketplace. And there's so many sects and segments in these countries that it's almost impossible to unite them under one common umbrella. I'm not a fan or in favor of dictators, but it worked in those countries. And so by destroying most of Libya, by destroying most of Syria, by destroying most of Iraq, and now you've got the situation in Gaza, the West Bank, Palestine, you've got millions of people that have been displaced, that are traveling throughout Europe and trying to find some safe haven. And the countries just can't manage it. They can't absorb the volume of immigration that's happening. Nothing's been like this since maybe World War II.
If you had to give it a job tomorrow, what would you do?
So I did that at Robb Report. I left the Robb Report, and I was like, my wife and I were like, great, we're going to hang out and we're going to do things and we're going to travel and so on and so forth. And we couldn't fill our days. We both worked our entire lives. My wife's in the same business and works with me in the Arnold Luxury Consulting. And we're like, what are we going to do? We don't play golf. We started pickleball. That was, the thing to do. That was okay. We go to museums, we go to shows, but it's hard to fill, 18 hours a day, 7 days a week when you're not working and doing something. And so to some extent, we've defined ourselves by our jobs, by our careers. And that was another reason why the luxury consulting business seemed to be something interesting, because we could do it 2 days a week, 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week, whatever we chose to do based on the businesses and the contracts that we were working on. There's been some times when we're completely overwhelmed with the amount of work that we have, and other days we're like, what are we going to do today? Well, we have nothing to do, right? So it's a contrast, which is I think true for many people in the consulting, independently in the consulting business, not for a Bain or...
Well, it's called the consultant's curse, actually, isn't it? It's the desire to constantly be like a part of the equation.
Yes.
Yes.
And relevant. There was a term that I hadn't heard before, which just struck me as being very germane, which is not VIP, but PIP, previously important person. And so, not that I consider myself to ever be a VIP, but I was certainly involved, engaged, and kind of in the thick of things. We both were. And now we're kind of on the periphery, like looking in, like over the hedge, like over the red velvet rope. So...
Okay, so what I can deduce from that is that if you did have to give it a job tomorrow, it certainly wouldn't be to play golf.
No, absolutely not.
And then, look, my last question, David, and thank you so much for your time, is what excites you about the next 5 years?
I think there's a lot of innovation. I'm both excited and nervous about AI. I think that can potentially solve some significant issues if it's used properly. I don't have the fear that we're going to get taken over, like, HAL in 2001 or a more recent iteration of that. I think it's going to help medicine and technology. I think it's going to help the human race in general. I think we can make some significant advances in the same way that we made advances when the personal computer business exploded. And hopefully it will be for the better. Hopefully it will be used for good, not for other.
Yeah, I think it will enhance the value of luxury in inverted commas. I think you have to look at things like banking to see what the value of a private banker is that was once commonplace.
Right.
When you automate the middle, you increase the value of the concept of a thing.
Yeah, the question is, if everyone has the same access, then what does that do?
Exactly.
What do we create?
But that's what's so funny, I find, about these the technocrats in Silicon Valley who talk of this age of infinite abundance, somehow just failing to identify the fact that if everything is available to everyone, as a human the human psyche is such that it seeks to differentiate itself and find a level of order and hierarchy and purpose and meaning. And all you do is just create another layer. I mean, it's like the great medical fallacy. You can kill cancer, but you'll create something worse. And on that very optimistic note,
This is fun. Thank you.
It's been really enjoyable. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time.
Thanks so much for listening. This has been What the Lux. You can find us on socials at Matter of Form, and drop us any questions or comments on Twitter using the hashtag #WhatTheLux. Or if you're a luxury brand looking for strategy and design that goes beyond the banal, get in touch via hello@matterofform.com and chat to one of our consultants.